of my project planning tool, I'm going to use this time to make my login page and my create an account page a little bit more responsive. I don't actually anticipate that it's not that responsive, but it's always good to check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first, let's go to my login page here, okay? So that way we're ready to make any edits. Then next I'm going to inspect and I'm going to use my dev tools in order to shrink and see what happens. Okay, so it looks like for the actual login to your account, that looks good, but the forgot your password and reset password part does not look good at a certain point. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at the iPhone SE. I'm gonna try to find. Okay, that's 390, 412. So I know the Galaxy Fold is our smallest, but I don't know if I want to go off of the smallest first. All right, so let's just go off the iPhone 375. All right, and we will start from there. All right, and of course I closed out of it. All right, so I'm just gonna shrink that. Okay, so I feel like the login looks pretty good, but there's definitely a max width of 75 here. So if I comment that out, it's gonna get bigger, okay? And honestly, I don't think we want as much of a gap on the side when we're looking at a small phone. So I think that would be my first place where I would use my media query is I would say const is, let's just go copy one. Make sure I get the right Chakra UI media query. All right. Okay, this one looks good. All right, so let's import use media query. And I'm gonna take a look as to where I think this starts to look bad. All right, so I feel like all the way through here, it looks good. I feel like maybe it's starting at 600, we could use a little bit more space on the sides. So we're gonna say is larger than 600, is larger than 600. All right, and then I'm gonna move in to here and I'm gonna make this a little bit more conditional. So I'm gonna say is larger than 600, the max width is gonna be 75. Otherwise, I'm gonna say the max width is going to be 95%. And let's see how that looks. All right, so now as we get smaller than 600, that's going to give us a little bit more, maybe let's say 90%, give us a little bit more of a buffer, and I think that looks pretty good. So now as I get smaller, it's going to look good, okay? So I'm gonna add another one, another media query, and I'm gonna use the number 300 as my breakpoint. And I'm going to find my heading here, and I'm gonna use the font size here. And I'm gonna say is larger than 300. Yeah, we can do 28, but otherwise I think we'll try 24. Okay, let's shrink down lower than 300. All right, that still looks a little bit too like big to me. So let's try 350. All right, that looks better already. So now let's, yeah. So at 350, that is just on the edge, and then we shrink down, and that looks better. Perfect. Okay. So then the next thing we want to take into consideration is going to be, so let's look at that Galaxy Fold phone. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to say that we can leave that as is. Ooh, let's fold it. Ooh, that's kind of fun. I'm going to leave that as is, but let's go ahead and let's look at this forgot your password section. All right. So gap between the two is 10, and justify content center and margin top 10. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a border of 1 pixel because I want to see what's going on. All right, so it looks like the whole thing is like 100% of the screen, okay? So the first thing I'm going to try is I'm actually going to try to do my max width, the similar thing. Okay. And I'm going to switch it to responsive here so I can kind of pull it. All right, so it's on the left, so we don't want it on the left. So we do want it to be centered. So I'm going to try to figure out how we make that centered. This is the classic, how do you center a div? All right, so I'm going to say margin 0 auto. Okay. And I'm going to, let's try, no. So the 0 auto worked in terms of that, but it wiped out my margin top here. So I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to look at what is happening. And I'm going to try to say display flex on the container on top. And then I'm going to say justify content center. So it put it all in a row, but we are going to change the flex direction to column. And that did not do what I wanted it to do. So I'm going to get rid of that. All right. I am going to also get rid of this max width. So it is going to be centered. I think what I'm going to do next is I'm going to say margin X equals, let's try margin X 2. Okay, so that's going to give me a little bit of spacing. Let's try 4. Now that gives me a little bit of spacing as we go down, so it can't squish too much into the sides. But ultimately that doesn't really matter because what I want to do is I want to wrap. So I'm going to say flex, wrap. So that way when it gets too small and it can't fit in this box, then it's going to wrap. Okay? And that already looks so much better. All right? But what I want though is I want the gap to shrink depending on how it's wrapping, when it moves to wrap. So if I look, we make it to, what's the number? Okay, so 443 is when it switches. Okay, so I'm going to just try to use the is larger than 600 so I don't have to have too many, but let's take a look and see how it looks. Is larger than 600, we'll have the gap be 10, otherwise let's have the gap be 4. All right, so see how the gap is shrinking? So instead of flex wrap, what I'm going to use is I'm going to reuse flex direction, okay? And I'm going to say is larger than 600. If it's larger than the 600, then we're going to say the direction is row. Otherwise, we're going to say the direction is column. Okay? So that way it wraps at the same point. I don't love how that is then making the button larger. So I think we are going to want to keep then with the flex wrap, which is okay. And I think we're just going to want to do the correct. Okay, so 420. Oh, but that's, the gap is now different. Okay. Okay, so the gap is 10. Oh, because it already wrapped. Okay, so where does it wrap? What's the break point? Let's figure that out again. So I think it was 443. Okay. So let's do is larger than 443. And then we are going to say is larger than 443. We're going to say 10. Otherwise, we're going to say 4. So then let's go down to 442, and now it looks better. Okay, so let's remove this border, and we're going to just kind of play around with it now. Make sure it looks how we want it to. That looks good. I like it. All right, so now this is going to, let's go ahead and look at all of our different screens. That looks good. Also looks good. All right, let's go and look at our Galaxy. That looks good. All right, so now what we can do is we can move on to our create an account page instead and take a look. And this actually already looks pretty good. I think this enter password again might be a little bit too wordy. And that's really the only issue that I see. I don't even know if it's worth changing though, to be honest. So I think I'm gonna say that's okay. All right, so we have now made our create an account page responsive, which didn't take any work. And we have our login page that is also responsive, which also didn't take much work. All right, and we will end the video here, and we'll go ahead and log in and then work on our project page next. See you in the next video.